The Illinois Department of Transportation welcomes you to an informational video for the Illinois 83 and Illinois 137 Preliminary Engineering and Environmental Study. Due to the uncertainty related to COVID-19 and social distancing requirements, IDOT is not hosting a formal in-person meeting. We will be sharing details of the study and encouraging public participation through the new interactive website. Please visit the IDOT project website to access the new interactive website. You can use this new website to learn more about the study and provide your comments and ideas. The outreach process begins on June 25th and runs through July 16th. Comments are always welcome, however, those received through July 16th will become part of the public outreach record. Once on the interactive website, please proceed with the following steps to review the study and provide input. Step 1. Sign in and provide an email address or mailing address so that we can provide additional updates on the study as they become available. However, this is optional and not required for advancing to the next steps. Step 2. Learn more about the Illinois 83-137 study. Step 3. View the interactive map with the preferred alternative and provide your thoughts and ideas on the key areas of the study. Comments can be made directly on the interactive map by dragging the icons along the top of the screen and placing them at the place of interest. Additional information on how to comment is provided near the end of this video. Step 4. This is simply another opportunity to share any additional comments and ideas you have about the study. The purpose for the virtual public outreach is to provide a brief overview of the project, a summary of the alternatives carried forward, present the preferred alternative and environmental impacts, collect public comments, and to provide information regarding the next steps in completing this study. The project extends through Lake County on Illinois 83 from Illinois 132 to Illinois 120, along Illinois 137 from Illinois 120 to east of US 45. This project is approximately 11 miles in length and travels through the villages of Lake Villa, Round Lake Beach, Grays Lake, and Libertyville. There are 2 emission areas within the corridor that proposed improvements will tie into, which include improvements recently completed at Rollins Road and those planned at the intersection of Illinois 83 and Illinois 120. This study will identify transportation needs along the corridor, collect information about a variety of resources, develop a broad range of transportation solutions, study and document potential effects, and recommend transportation improvements that benefit residents, businesses, and the traveling public. Not to be confused with the Restore Illinois phases associated with COVID-19, IDOT develops highway transportation improvement projects in 3 IDOT project phases. The Illinois 83-137 study is currently in Phase 1, in which preliminary engineering and environmental studies are completed to develop an improvement of the roadway that addresses an established purpose and need for the study. Phase 2, Design, consists of refining the design to develop contract plans and land acquisition. Phase 3, Construction, consists of the actual construction of the project. The contract plan preparation phase, Phase 2, is currently funded and will begin upon completion of the Phase 1 study. Funding for land acquisition and construction is not included in the department's fiscal year 2020 through 2025 proposed highway improvement program. IDOT will consider all input from stakeholders throughout the Phase 1 process to support in the development of viable solutions. IDOT utilizes context-sensitive solutions, or CSS, to engage and inform the community. CSS is a collaborative process to involve stakeholders in decision-making. This coordination helps to ensure that the planned improvement fits into its surrounding, also referred to as its context. The CSS process considers needs throughout the area of a project, so improvements made for safety and mobility and other needs can also address all modes of transportation while preserving the scenic, economic, historic, and natural qualities of the area. The Phase 1 study process involves 4 primary components. These include data collection, developing the purpose and need of a project, developing and evaluating alternatives, and determining a preferred alternative. Throughout the Phase 1 study process, principles of CSS are used to engage stakeholders through a number of tools such as public meetings, community advisory group meetings, media and virtual public outreach, the project website, local municipality and agency meetings, project newsletters, and other small group presentations. There have been 4 community advisory group meetings to date. A community advisory group, or CAG, is a group of voluntary community members, including study area residents, businesses, and property owners, representing a broad range of interests. The group meets with IDOT during the study process to identify stakeholder interests and values, develop improvement options, and evaluate the potential effects of those options on community resources. There have also been 2 public meetings to present the study to the public and gather input and comments on the project. Public meeting number 1 was held on March 6th of 2012, while public meeting 2 was on May 24th of 2016. This virtual public outreach is taking the place of public meeting number 3. 1 CAG meeting and the public hearing are anticipated for the fall and winter of 2020. The project purpose and need was developed from a problem statement as well as from a technical analysis of the roadway and additional stakeholder input. The purpose of the proposed action is to improve safety, improve mobility, and improve multimodal opportunities along the corridor. With safety identified as a key concern for the corridor, crash history along the corridor was utilized to identify high crash locations and to determine patterns related to safety concerns. There were 1,176 crashes identified through the corridor in the 5-year period studied. The majority of crashes were rear-end collisions, accounting for 54% of the total crashes, with side swipe and turning crashes accounting for 8% and 20% respectively. Given the anticipated growth along the corridor, IL-83 137 within the study limits will likely experience more crashes as a result of increasing traffic. Therefore, in order to reduce the potential for crashes, the traffic capacity of the roadway must be improved. Other types of crashes, such as sideswipe and turning collisions, are a result of the lack of access management in the areas with closely spaced access points that may be alleviated by limiting access as well as eliminating entrance locations in close proximity to intersections. To determine the mobility within the corridor, the existing traffic volumes are measured and future volumes projected. The existing needs can then be determined and alternatives developed to provide the capacity as to meet the required design criteria. Traffic capacity and the associated traffic congestions are defined in terms of levels of service, or LOS. The level of service is expressed by a scale ranging from A to F. Level of service A represents the best traffic condition with no backups or obstacles to traffic flow, and F represents a total breakdown in traffic operations accompanied by extensive delays and traffic volumes that approach capacity. The design requires that the projected 2040 traffic capacity along the corridor have a minimum levels of service of D and a target LOS of C or higher. The existing traffic volumes along the corridor range from 13,000 to approximately 22,000 vehicles per day and currently have a level of service of E. The traffic volume is projected to increase to 14,000 and 31,000 vehicles per day by year 2040. If no improvements are completed, the projected level of service will remain below the acceptable level in most areas along the corridor. The only areas where acceptable levels were found is where 4 or 5 lane improvements have been completed or are planned to be completed. Multimodal opportunities were identified as another need along this corridor. Because of the residential and commercial land use found along the corridor, as well as the frequency of parks, schools, bike paths, metro stations, and intermittent sidewalks within the area, the inclusion of bicycle and pedestrian facilities along the corridor would provide an alternative means of travel and access. The alternative development process is a multi-step process of developing, improving, screening, and eliminating alternatives until a preferred alternative is selected. Throughout this process, IDOT utilizes CSS to keep the community engaged in the project, which helps to ensure the preferred alternatives fit the needs of the community. The process begins by screening initial alternatives to make sure that they meet the purpose and need of the project and that they do not have fatal flaws. Following this screening, the alternatives carried forward are evaluated in greater detail. Then the alternatives and their associated impacts will be further refined and subsequently screened until a preferred alternative is selected. This is where we are now in the process. The consideration of both environmental resources and engineering design elements found within the corridor is an integral part of developing a range of alternatives that provide viable options for improving the roadway corridor. This project is being developed in accordance with the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. The environmental impacts of potential alternatives are a critical component to the overall alternative development process. The purpose of NEPA is to ensure that environmental factors are weighed equally when compared to other factors in the decision-making process. For federal funding eligibility, NEPA compliance is required. A full range of reasonable alternatives are evaluated, including the no-build alternative, along with comprehensive environmental review to avoid, minimize, and mitigate impacts. Environmental surveys were collected throughout the project area so that we could identify impacts as we develop alternatives. By identifying these environmental features, we can better determine the alternatives that best serve the purpose and need of the project while minimizing environmental impacts. Environmental features include the following: wetlands, protected species and habitats, floodplains, historic sites and cemeteries, 4F resources, parks, recreation areas and refuges, forest preserves, 6F, Land and Water Conservation Fund Act, or LawCon resources, outdoor recreational resources, community and social resources, environmental justice communities, and relocation impacts. This study is being processed as an environmental assessment, or EA, which assists decision makers in determining if a federal project's impacts are significant. The alternatives will be identified and analyzed to identify the alternative that best meets the needs of the project study area, while avoiding or minimizing environmental impacts. Upon completion of the EA, a finding of no significant impact, or FONSI, is anticipated, which will complete the environmental studies for the project. At intersections, the considerations included looking at signal warrants, geometric improvements, and alternative design concepts. No additional signals are warranted throughout the corridor. Intersection design studies will be prepared to help determine the best ways to evaluate existing geometrics, address future traffic demands, minimize right-of-way impacts, and improve safety and pedestrian accessibility at each location. 20 locations within the corridor were considered to determine if a multi-lane roundabout was feasible. The analysis identified concerns relating to traffic volumes and patterns at multiple locations, which were eliminated from further evaluation. However, 2 potentially suitable locations were identified and carried forward. The effectiveness of the alternatives depends on many factors, but is evaluated by how well they address the purpose and need. 2 of the primary factors identified in our PNN are safety and mobility. Access management is the control of the location, spacing, design, and operation of driveways, median openings, and the street connections to a roadway. The purpose of access management is to help balance safety and mobility by reducing the number of conflict points and traffic congestion. An increased number of driveways within a corridor increases the likelihood for crashes to occur. Raised medians are a key tool used for access management. Raised medians separate traffic and direct motorists where to access properties so that turning and crossing movements occur at fewer locations. Additionally, raised medians provide opportunities for improving aesthetics. U-turn bump outs are provided at locations that were coordinated with local officials to provide additional access opportunities. The lane configuration was also studied throughout the corridor by developing initial build alternatives, which included a 2-lane alternative with 1 through lane in each direction and a center turn lane, and a congestion management process (CMP) alternative were evaluated. CMP strategies have been incorporated into this project where practical, including increased turn lane storage capacities, traffic signal modernization, consolidation of access points, streets, and driveways, channelized intersections with left and right turn lanes, adding multi-use paths and sidewalks, and raised curb medians. 3 basic types of 4-lane alternatives all which have 2 through lanes in each direction, were also developed. These alternatives include various median types such as raised curb median, a flush median center turn lane, and a depressed grass median, which is used in low-density development areas with increased speeds. To determine the feasibility of a 2-lane alternative, it was modeled to determine its capacity. As previously stated, the design criteria require a projected 2040 traffic capacity level of D or higher. The 2-lane roadway model produced a level of service of E where they were used within the corridor. The 2-lane alternatives with center turn lane and the CMP alternative were found to not meet the purpose and need of the project because the alternatives retained 1 through lane in each direction, and the additional roadway capacity was determined to be needed in order to improve safety by reducing congestion. Therefore, these alternatives were dismissed from further consideration. Similarly, the no-build alternative does not meet the purpose and need of the project, but will be retained through the environmental review process as a comparison for study. To determine the feasibility of 4-lane alternatives, they were also analyzed to determine capacity. The project level of service in these areas with a 4-lane improvement was found to be between a B and a D. Since the 4-lane alternative provides suitable mobility, 4-lane design alternatives will be used for the range of alternatives. The characteristics of the corridor is important to identify the elements used in the alternatives. The land use varies significantly along the corridor. To develop alternatives that more closely align with the land use in the various areas, the corridor was first divided into 3 sections. These are referred to as the project's north, central, and south sections. The north section extends from Illinois 132 to Washington Street and is made up of medium-density development and property access with speeds of 45 to 55 miles per hour. The central section extends from Washington Street to Illinois 120, is highly developed, and the most densely populated section of the corridor, having substantial property access with reduced speeds of 35 to 40 miles per hour. The south section extends from Illinois 120 to east of US 45, is made up of low-density development and property access with increased speeds of 45 to 55 miles per hour. By dividing the corridor up this way, we could better focus on the alternatives in those areas that will better serve the community. In the north section, there are 3 alternatives carried forward. The N1 alternative is a 4-lane cross-section with a raised curb median, which can be considered the typical section throughout the majority of the north section. Due to frequent access points onto Illinois 83, the N1A alternative was created and provides a flush median, center turn lane, in the northernmost section of the corridor just south of 132. This alternative narrows the footprint and would provide more access. Due to environmental concerns, the N1B and N1C alternatives were created and provided a narrower raised curb median with reduced lane widths. All 3 alternatives primarily follow the existing centerline alignment, having outside curb and gutter, and include a multi-use path along the east side of the roadway and a sidewalk along the west side of the roadway throughout the length of the section. In the central section, 3 alternatives were carried forward. The first alternative replicates the 4-lane cross-section in the north section with a raised curb median. The second alternative is a 4-lane roadway with a flushed median center turn lane. The third alternative is a 4-lane roadway with a narrower raised curb median and roundabouts at the intersection of Frederick Road and Library Lane. All 3 alternatives primarily follow the existing centerline alignment, have outside curb and gutter, and include a multi-use path along the east side of the roadway and a sidewalk on the west side of the roadway throughout the length of the section. In the south section, an alternative was first developed that provides 4-lane roadway with a standard width depressed grass median, outside paved shoulders and ditches, and a multi-use path along the east side of the roadway. The entire south section is parallel and adjacent to a railroad that puts constraints on right-of-way. Therefore, to reduce the right-of-way impacts, the S2 alternative was developed with a narrower depressed median. This alternative reduced impacts significantly, allowing the standard width alternative to be eliminated from further consideration. This alternative is the primary design used throughout the south section. In areas of residential development, the 30-foot median alternative was refined to provide alternatives that further reduced impacts. These include an alternative S2A that places the multi-use path along the edge of the shoulder, as well as an alternative S2B with no path along the roadway in the further southernmost section. Multiple alternatives were studied during the Alternatives Carry Forward process. A hybrid alternative was created that combines the least environmental damaging concepts and/or locally preferred designs for each section of the corridor while meeting IDOT safety and geometric specifications. The alternatives shown in green were utilized in development of the hybrid alternative. The hybrid also added a raised median in the southernmost section from US 45 to the southern limit to reduce the roadway footprint and reduce environmental and property impacts. The recommended preferred alternative is the alternative that best meets the project's purpose and need while balancing and minimizing impacts to environmental resources. Generally, the recommended preferred alternative consists of constructing a 4-lane roadway section with varying median types throughout the corridor. As shown on the map, a multi-use path will be located on the east side of the roadway and a sidewalk will be located on the west side of the roadway in the north and central sections from Illinois 132 to Illinois 120. There is only a multi-use path through the majority of the south section. Drainage improvements and best management practices, BMPs, are also being included in the improvements. The following slides will go over the recommended preferred alternative for all 3 sections along the corridor. In the north section, the recommended preferred alternative is a flush median center turn lane in the northernmost portion from Illinois 132 to Bretton's Drive to allow for access to the businesses in this area. South of Bretton's Drive to Washington Street provides a raised curb median with left turn lanes provided at access points. A proposed sidewalk and multi-use path are included throughout the north section. In the central section, the recommended preferred alternative from Washington Street to Illinois 120 Mission area consists of a raised curb median with left turn lanes provided at access locations. U-turn bump outs are provided at locations that were coordinated with the local officials to provide additional access opportunities. A proposed sidewalk and multi-use path are included throughout this section. In the south section, the recommended preferred alternative from the Illinois 120 Mission to US 45 consists of a depressed grass median, and from US 45 to south of Bull Creek Drive consists of a raised curb median with left turn lanes provided at access locations. The sidewalk in the south section has been eliminated to reduce impacts to the Canadian National Railroad right-of-way. To further reduce right-of-way impacts, the proposed multi-use path along the corridor ends north of Bull Creek subdivision. The slide summarizes the environmental resources impacted by the recommended preferred alternative. These impacts include natural environment resources such as wetlands and water resources, and human environment such as land acquisition and residential and business relocation. No impact to cultural, historical, or threatened and endangered species are anticipated. There will be land acquisition required to construct the preferred alternative. The 3 types of land acquisition are fee simple acquisition, permanent easements, and temporary easements. A fee simple right-of-way acquisition includes the purchase of all rights and interests on the property. With a permanent easement, the ownership is retained by the property owner, but the agency is allowed access for perpetual use. With a temporary easement, ownership is retained by the property owner, and the land is only temporarily used during constructions for items such as grading work, driveway construction, and landscaping restoration. Please note that the numbers shown are preliminary and will likely be revised during the study. The land acquisition process involves the following sequence of steps. First, the ownership of the property is confirmed. A plat of survey drawing is prepared to show the dimensions and amount of property that is being acquired, and an independent appraisal is made to determine the fair market value of the property to be acquired. Second, negotiations begin with an offer to acquire the necessary property at the appraised value. Third, if a settlement cannot be reached, the matter is referred to the courts for acquisition under the law of eminent domain. Fourth, relocation assistance is provided when a building or structure is being acquired. A traffic noise study is being conducted to evaluate traffic noise for the proposed improvements. The noise study includes field noise monitoring, analysis of the traffic noise model which evaluates existing and future noise levels, as well as noise abatement and potential reduction measures. The evaluation of noise mitigation measures must be feasible and reasonable. To meet these requirements, the mitigation must achieve required sound reduction, be feasible to construct, cost-effective, and finally be majority in favor of those benefited. That final component for obtaining viewpoints would be done during the final design phase 2. The project team has preliminary noise analysis results and potential noise wall locations, which can be found on the Virtual Public Outreach interactive map under the Learn More About the IL-83 137 Preferred Alternative tab. The noise results will be presented in more detail at the upcoming public hearing. The next steps going forward are to refine the preferred alternative based on public feedback, receive approval of the environmental assessment, a public hearing is anticipated for fall of 2020, and finally, obtain approval of environmental studies. We hope this information has been helpful in understanding the Illinois 83-137 study and where we are in the process. Your input is very valuable to the project study. There are multiple ways to share your input. You can provide comments on the interactive website or complete a comment form on IDOT's project website. You may also send comments by email or standard mail to the project team. Comments received by July 16, 2020 will be included in the public outreach record. As mentioned at the beginning of this video, there are 4 steps to view information and comment on the Virtual Public Outreach website. Step 3 allows the public to view the preferred alternative on an interactive map. The tabs along the left side of the screen include a welcome map and instructions, a tab to learn more about the project study, a separate tab for each section of the preferred alternative, and a final tab to see what others have said about the project. You will see 5 icons at the top of your screen. Comments can be made on any tab by dragging one of the icons to the location of interest. The final step, Step 4, is a separate tab on the interactive website homepage that gives the public another opportunity to share any additional comments and ideas about the Illinois 83-137 study. The Illinois Department of Transportation thanks you for taking the time to learn more and provide your input on the Illinois 83-137 Phase 1 study.